Welcome to the Why Factor, a chance to work out why we do what we do. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Thanks for downloading this edition of the Why Factor from the BBC, a programme that seeks to find out why we do the things we do. I hope you enjoy it. How do you start your day? It's a more complicated question than you realise, and that's because you probably don't think about it very much. Much of what we do every day. We create order. We have habits.
We come face to face with lots of decisions every day, from tying our shoes in the morning to choosing which way we want to go to work. And we kind of have to prioritise different tasks that are more complicated than others that don't change a lot. Because the world is so complex, it's important to automate very simple behaviours which frees up our brains to focus on more complicated tasks.
That's Dr. Claire Gillan of Trinity College, Dublin. And as she explains, we are all largely creatures of habit. I'm Shuli Ghosh, and this is the Why Factor on the BBC World Service. From the minute we get up, to the way we make breakfast, how we drive the car or ride a bike, even the way we tie our shoelaces. These are everyday habits we do without thinking. And that's a good thing, because if we had to make conscious decisions about every single activity, our brains would just clog up. Right, let's go. So off to work, lock the door. Hang on a minute, did I lock the door? I'm going to have to check. The downside of habit is that you often can't remember doing things, like locking the front door. There are habits which get in the way, that we can't control, and which make our lives stressful and frustrating.
Every time I threw anything away, I would check it to make sure I wasn't throwing away anything important. I'd be checking through the bins. Any time I sent a letter, I'd check the inside of the envelope, I'd check the letter, there was nothing attached to it. When I had to send all the thank you notes for the wedding, there was probably about 160 notes, and it just took hours because every note I had to check, every envelope I had to check, and not just once, it's again and again and again. I just get an overwhelming feeling that I have to do it in order to feel calm again.
There are habits we try to build to improve our lives.
What makes us happy? Relationships. So what are some habits that you could do to strengthen your relationships? You could get in the habit of calling your parents every day. One of the habits that we formed in our household that worked really well was to give warm hellos and goodbyes. So every time anybody comes in or leaves our apartment, they get a really warm greeting so that you really feel recognized and acknowledged as you come and go. It made a huge difference in the atmosphere of our house.
Once you form a habit, you do it automatically. In fact, you might be surprised to know just how much of your behaviour happens without you thinking about it.
I'm not sure that people realize that it's as high as 40%, because some people will say to me, I have no habits. And I'm like, well, do you brush your teeth every morning? Do you put on a seatbelt when you get into a car? I think people underestimate how many habits shape our day. People also underestimate how valuable they can be in making certain challenging aspects a lot easier.
Gretchen Rubin is a best-selling author on happiness and habits.
If you can get the habits to work for you, it is just enormously helpful. Being able to do something consistently over time with not much friction is the easiest way to get stuff done.
It can also be the safest way to get things done. There are professions which require very precise habits and routines to avoid dangerous situations, like being responsible for the takeoff and landing of planes.
The first thing they do is to take over from the controller that's currently sitting in that position. There's a checklist that the controller will go through, which will identify which aircraft are being controlled, where are they on the radar screen, where is the information associated with them, is there any adverse weather or any unusual circumstances that he needs to be aware of in that sector.
Air traffic controllers are trained to follow a consistent set of habits without question. They're crucial. Lives depend on them.
Last year we handled 2.3 million aircraft and carried 250 million passengers in the UK very, very safely. My name is Neil May. I'm the head of human factors at NATS.
NATS, as you may have gathered, is Britain's air traffic service. And Neil's Human Factors Department looks at how to minimise human error in a job that demands constant attention.
Controllers develop a set of habits to help them do their job. And within human factors, we're looking at what are those habits, are they effective, how often are they used, how can we share them with other controllers to ensure that best practice is used as widely as possible.
And it's not just about developing a set of habits, it's about knowing when to break them.
For 99.99% of the time, it is pretty routine what they do. It's the same actions that they're taking, it's the same messages that they're giving to the aircraft, it's the same information that they're collecting from their radar screen.
So if the controller's doing the same thing every day, over and over, how do you keep them alert?
There's lots of things that we do. We ensure that their workload is within acceptable levels. We don't want them being too quiet because the human is more likely to make mistakes or to miss things when they are too quiet. But equally, we don't want them to be too busy either, because when you get overloaded, that's the time when you can miss information or make mistakes. It's very, very important for the controllers to have good habits from day one at the college when they join us. We train them into what good habits look like.
There's an everyday idea of habit, something that you're used to doing and you just repeat doing, and we're usually consciously aware of what we're doing when we're carrying out our habits. It's not like the world goes dark to us. But a lot of research in recent years has suggested that that consciousness, that awareness of what's going on around us, isn't actually playing a role in guiding our behaviour.
Nick Shea is a professor of philosophy at the University of London. He says without habits, our brains would be so overwhelmed by all the different choices we have to make, we wouldn't make it through our day.
Quite a lot of what you do automatically happens without requiring consciousness.
So is it kind of an autopilot when we're doing things like driving the same route to work or sitting on the same seat on the train or taking the same journey through a supermarket? Are we doing that on autopilot?
I think autopilot's an excellent image because an awful lot of what we do is just going on automatically. We can be thinking about something else, but it's not completely like autopilot because if something comes along to interrupt what we're doing, so we come to the bus stop and there's a notice saying the bus isn't coming today, then we can think about what to do.
It can be quite frustrating at times, though, because the amount of times I've gone out of the house and 2 minutes later thought, oh my goodness, did I lock the door? Because I can't remember locking the door, but I know I must have done because I always lock the door. But I've actually found myself having to go back and check, even though that is an automatic reaction to leaving my house.
I think that's a perfectly understandable phenomenon. What's happening there is that you've gone through a series of routine actions without thinking about them, and so you're not laying down very rich memories about them. And then when you kick in this second facility that you have for reasoning about what you're doing, then you start worrying. You start thinking, what would happen if I hadn't locked the door?
So, can our habits be exploited? Well, yes. It turns out that the very behaviour that lets us navigate our lives more easily also makes us a target for the marketing industry. By and large, it sounds as though we're quite predictable. We have patterns. And if you can work out the patterns, then you can exploit that.
That's right. And that means there's an arms race between the people that want to exploit our automatic tendencies and us as an individual that want not to be exploited. And as a little poor consumer, you're probably at the weaker end of that arms race up against multinationals that have spent a lot of time doing marketing and studying your tendencies.
And not only can businesses exploit our habits, they can encourage us to develop new ones.
There's two types of influence online. There's persuasion and there's coercion. Persuasion is helping people do things they want to do, and coercion is getting people to do things they don't want to do.
Nir Eyal is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and the author of Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. 10 years ago, the idea of staring at a small screen, endlessly checking for anything new, was unthinkable. Now it's an everyday routine. But why are we hooked on this need for constant monitoring? Have we been persuaded or coerced?
Sophocles said that nothing vast enters the life of mortals without a curse. So of course there's going to be bad sides to technology. Of course there are going to be costs, just like there were costs to the agricultural revolution. There's cost to the industrial revolution. Of course there's cost with the information age that we live in today. On the whole, I think these are fantastic technologies, but of course the price that we pay is with our attention and with our time.
Nir Eyal studies the hooks companies use to attract us to their products. He also offers suggestions on how we can manage the habits which have become nearly universal in the digital age, like checking your phone dozens of times a day.
Every hook has 4 steps. These trigger, an action, a reward, and an investment. And so the way we would break a bad habit is to put distance in between those steps. So you would remove the triggers. So a simple thing that everyone should do, take 15 minutes to make sure that you disable notifications. About 2/3 of people who have a smartphone never change their notification settings. That's madness. We can't keep letting the app makers interrupt us on their schedule. Take 15 minutes and adjust your notification settings so you're not constantly interrupted. We can make the actions more difficult, meaning uninstall apps that don't serve you throughout your day. So I love Twitter, I love Facebook, but I don't have them on my phone. I only use them on my desktop because I don't want to use them throughout the day. We can delay the reward. So when I read articles online, I found that I would fall into this vortex of reading more news and more articles and more content. And so instead, I save all that into an app which I can then read later in my day. And then finally, the 4th step, you don't want to keep investing in services that have no end in sight.
But when do these hooks move from the marketable to the malign? When does a habit turn into an addiction?
A habit is defined as an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. There's nothing good or bad inherently about a habit. It's about 50% of what you do every day is done out of habit, and this serves us. Addictions, however, are always bad. So the definition of addiction is a persistent compulsive dependency on a behavior or substance that harms the user. So what that means is that you're not actually addicted to something unless it harms you. You want to stop but can't. So when people say I'm addicted to running, that's not really exactly right. You might really enjoy running, but unless it hurts you and you can't stop, that's not an addiction. Now, what happens with products online, Facebook or email or Instagram or WhatsApp, people like these products. Sometimes they're time wasters, but for the vast majority of us, it's not an addiction because if we're really honest with ourselves, we're not freebasing Facebook and injecting Instagram into our veins. They're not something that most people, if they really wanted to stop, that they couldn't stop.
So checking your phone more than you should can be nothing more serious than time wasting. But there are people with habits which they can't control. It's a psychological condition which has crept into the cultural mainstream, obsessive-compulsive disorder.
We think that in OCD, they have a tendency to rely on their habit system a little too much, and that actually causes them to get stuck in patterns of repetitive compulsive behaviour.
Dr. Claire Gillen is trying to understand how the brains of patients with OCD allow them to develop behaviours which overpower their lives.
When I started my PhD and working in this area, I was exposed to this classic view of OCD being all about obsessions. And then I started to meet patients. And one of the most striking things about that experience for me was talking to people who couldn't leave their homes because they had to turn the lights off a certain way or check the windows a certain way. And the compulsions had come to the point where they were really taking over their lives. But when you ask them, why they're doing it, they might talk about some concept or some fear that's linked to the behavior. But they'll say to you very clearly that they know that it's not true. So it's like you're kind of trapped by the need to execute these habits.
When I was locking the house up for holidays, Easter, Christmas, that was incredibly stressful. I'd have to go around and check all the taps, the windows, the doors. Turning the water off at the mains was particularly stressful. I'd have to check and check and check. And then actually leaving the house and shutting the door took a lot of effort, and it did make me very anxious. That was pretty much the only thing I did for a lot of years until we moved to Amsterdam in 1998, and that's when the behaviours really started to get out of control.
Ruchi has suffered symptoms of OCD since she was a child. It started as a simple habit of checking her wardrobe every night to make sure no one was in it. But over the years, her anxieties got worse. And though she tried to hide her OCD, it eventually put a strain on her family life. And I should know, because Ruchi is my sister. So I wasn't aware of your OCD about checking things and having to recheck things and check through the bins and things like that. I've known you as having OCD about germs and cleaning, and that got pretty bad, didn't it?
So the whole worry about germs and contamination just got out of hand, and it was literally anything you can think of would have been a cause for worry for me. You know, going to the supermarket, I would have to check and discount probably 3, 4, 5 trolleys if there was the slightest bit of something in them. So that was stressful because I was aware of people looking at me thinking, what is she doing? You know, why not just take the first trolley? Going round the supermarket, I could never take the first item off the shelf. I had to go 2 or 3 back to make sure nobody had touched it. I couldn't go to a cashier because I didn't want them to touch the shopping before I put it away, so I always did the self-scan. If there was anything on the scanning machine, I'd have to go to another one, so I might go to 2 or 3 different self-scan areas before I found one that I was happy with. Very often, just walking around the supermarket, I would have to wipe my hands several times. Sometimes, if a cashier had had to help me out at the self-scan and had touched the shopping. I remember once I had grapefruits and I didn't want to put them on the machine because it was dirty, so I was doing my best to keep them away, but I couldn't scan them, so a lady came over and helped me and she put the grapefruits onto the scanner and I couldn't bear it, so I kept them separately, and then as I walked out the shop I threw them away because I just couldn't stand the thought of them coming into the house. So I know it's not helping doing the behaviours, carrying them out, but in the short term it does give you some kind of relief.
So trying to understand why we form the habits we do is a really interesting question. The spectrum of habits that you see in something like OCD are extremely broad and they don't fit neatly into one particular box or another. You do have people who have concerns over hygiene, but you also have people who have concerns over whether or not they've caused an accident, whether that noise that they heard as they're driving by was a body that they accidentally drove over and they might need to go back and check. You've other patients that have concerns over smells that might or may not be present in their home. The spectrum of symptoms that you see in OCD is extremely varied. Perhaps it just comes down to the individual quirks that make all of us different from one another.
Do you think people really understand the problem of OCD and how badly it can affect sufferers, how bad it can get?
The term OCD is bandied about now quite glibly by some people. You know, you get some people who say, oh yeah, I'm OCD because I like my cans of beans ordered in the right way or my nail varnishes in colour order. And that's a habit that they do, but it doesn't really begin to go anywhere near being OCD. And they don't understand just how difficult it is for people who live with it day in, day out, and how crushing it can be to have that disorder and how much it impacts on your life and the life of your family, your nearest and dearest. And also you get the old school who say, oh, just think yourself out of it, just buck up, it's all in your mind. If I could think my way out of it and it'd be that easy, I could do it like that, then I would, believe me.
Really, the core and the most effective behavioural treatment for OCD is something called exposure and response prevention. And what that involves is breaking those habits, forcing yourself to resist the behavioural repetition, to sit there with the anxiety and wait as that anxiety naturally dissipates. And in a kind of series of increasing difficulty and increasing progression, one eventually stops washing their hands 20 times and just does it 18 times. And then next week they do it 16 times and next week 14 times. Each time sitting with the anxiety until eventually they get down to the normal range and they've kind of gotten themselves out of this discomfort box that is OCD and can wash their hands twice.
My sister eventually sought treatment for her OCD, and with the help of medication and therapy, she's now much healthier. It's hard to break bad habits, but we can also develop good ones to make us happy.
If you think about what you want more of in your life or less of in your life, then you can think about how the habits could support you in meeting that aim. So you're working towards it consistently.
Gretchen Rubin is the author of Better Than Before, What I Learned About Making and Breaking Habits.
Now, in terms of what's a bad habit and what's a good habit, it's a little bit of phrasing, right? Because a lot of times it's a good habit or a bad habit, depending on how you frame it. What happens for a lot of us, you might try and fail to change a habit over and over. You've made the same New Year's resolution for 5 years in a row. And you get discouraged, and people often start blaming themselves. I have no willpower. I have no self-control. I'm lazy. But part of it is that people will try to do something in a way that's wrong for them. And to take the most obvious example, morning people and night people. Research shows this is a real thing. It's largely genetically determined and also a function of age. And yet, we're told often, if something's important to you, if you want to exercise, you should get up early and do it first thing. But for night people, they can probably barely get out of bed in time to get to work or school. The idea that they're going to get up early and exercise, it's not going to work for them. And it's not because they're lazy or they don't have self-control. It's just that this habit is not set up in a way that will help them to succeed.
And there are an infinite amount of ways to build habits. It's all down to motivation.
I heard a habit of one woman. So she wanted to get up on time, but she lived by herself. So how could she hold herself accountable for getting up on time every day? She was just hitting the snooze alarm over and over. So what she did is she posted a very embarrassing Facebook post and set it to automatically send every day unless she got up and went to her desk and turned it off. So I thought that was a very funny habit as a way to get herself to get up out of bed every day. Anyone who wants to can tap into the power of habits, but they have to do it in the way that's going to work for them.
So, can we think ourselves into habits that are good for us? If I keep telling myself the gym is a great fun place, will I start to go there automatically?
I don't think so, because talking to yourself in your conscious mind and thinking through something isn't really going to affect these deeper brain structures, the basal ganglia, which are actually controlling your habit. So the best thing you can do to get yourself a habit to go to the gym is unfortunately to go to the gym over and over again until the act of going there doesn't require you to talk yourself into it. It's just, I go there at 5 every day. I've been doing that for 3 weeks, and that's now what I do.
The human brain is a wonderful thing. It can steer us through most of our day without much conscious thought. We are indeed creatures of habit, but that doesn't mean our habits can't be changed.
We are conscious creatures, but it looks like consciousness isn't needed for quite a lot of our everyday dealings with the world. So that raises the pressing question, what is the purpose of consciousness? And that's what makes the question of the extent to which we're creatures of habit so fascinating. As a philosopher thinking about habits, we're inevitably going to be drawn back to Aristotle. He talked about habits in the context of becoming the kind of person you are. And his picture was we accept that we're creatures of habits, that a lot of what we do in situations are going to be automatic, habitual response to the situation. But that doesn't mean we're not responsible. That doesn't mean that it's not us that's doing it. It does mean that we've got this big responsibility to train ourselves to have the good habits. So if you want to lead the good life and be a good person, you've got to recognize that you're a creature of habit and then go down the hard path of training yourself to have the right kinds of habits.
I'm Shuli Ghosh, and you've been listening to The Why Factor. The producer was Sandra Canthel. You can listen again to this programme and hear other Why Factors, such as why we work with our hands and why words matter, on our website. And we'd love to hear your views and suggestions on future topics. You can reach us at yfactor@bbc.com.